Ever find yourself just like completely baffled by what it even means to be alive? You know what I mean? Not
Yeah.
just like the physical stuff, but like what's really going on underneath.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a question that's plagued philosophers and scientists forever. And well, it's pretty much the perfect place to start our deep dive today.
Definitely. Because today we're going to be talking about this potentially, well, mind-blowing idea that we are all software. This isn't just some catchy phrase, though. It's thinkers like Joseph Bach who are arguing that the essence of life, the real core of it, isn't just in the physical stuff, but in this amazing self-organizing information processing. You could say it's the software that drives every single thing we do and every single thing that anything alive does.
It might sound a bit out there at first, I get that, but stick with us. As we go deeper, you'll see how this actually gives us a really neat and surprisingly insightful framework for understanding just how biology ticks.
And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're taking this whole software analogy and running with it. We're going to see how so many of the core things that make something alive can be seen through this lens.
Yeah.
And the stuff we're looking at for this deep dive, well, it offers some seriously fresh ways of thinking about what being alive even means.
Get ready for a wild ride, folks. What we're aiming for here is to give you a totally new perspective, not just on nature, but also on this crazy, fast-moving world of artificial life. We're going way past simple definitions and diving headfirst into self-organization and information processing, the stuff that might actually be the key to life itself.
Okay, so let's jump right into this life is self-organizing software thing. What are we really talking about here? Can you break it down a bit?
Basically, the idea is that life, and I mean all of life, even with all its mind-boggling complexity, works kind of like super intricate software running on the hardware of, well, cells. And more, we're actually seeing this play out in artificial systems built on silicon. But this software isn't like some static code, you know? It's this crazy, dynamic, and adaptive system of processes that's behind everything from how our bodies work at the most basic level to our thoughts and all the complicated things we do.
Okay, so if we're thinking of ourselves and all living things as this dynamic software, how does something as basic as self-replication fit into this whole picture?
Great question and a perfect place to start. Think DNA and RNA. They're the bedrock, the fundamental code in biological life. That code has the whole blueprint for building and copying an organism. It's like the ultimate source code. What's wild is that in artificial life, we're seeing the same principles pop up. Scientists are building self-replicating programs and even robots that can literally make copies of themselves. This shows that this ability to copy information, the heart of self-replication, isn't bound to some specific physical material. It's the information itself that matters.
That's a really good point. So hitting copy and paste on your computer. It's not about the paper, it's about the words on it. Okay, let's move on to something a little more, well, dynamic. Evolution. How does this software idea change how we think about evolution by natural selection?
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, and maybe where this analogy really starts to shine. Just like you can tweak or update software code, life's genetic code, that's the DNA, can change randomly. We call those mutations. So natural selection acts like this filter, favoring the software versions and the organisms they create that fit best in their environment. Those better adapted programs, they just run better, make more copies of themselves, and pass on that slightly tweaked code. It's like how software gets updated, you know? The good stuff replaces the old stuff. And the fitness of the software, well, it's all about how well it works in its environment.
That's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's not just about survival, it's about constant improvement of the biological software. Now, we all know that living things are super complex. So how does this crazy complexity come from what you're calling software?
Now that brings us to something called emergence, and it's super fascinating. Think about how intricate a human body is, or even a single cell. That complexity doesn't usually come from some single top-down instruction. Instead, it comes from all these tiny software parts, genes, proteins, and cells, interacting in all sorts of ways. What's really cool is that the real brilliance of life might not be in having these super complex parts, but in how those simpler pieces work together, following some pretty basic rules. And guess what? We're seeing the same thing in artificial life. Simple rules in a program can lead to these crazy, intricate patterns and behaviors. It's like magic. It's like complex results can come from this super smart orchestration of simple software building blocks.
It's like an ant colony. Each ant has a few simple jobs, but together they make this crazy complex and organized society. So it's not about some central control, it's about all these local interactions making this global order. And hey, that sounds a lot like our next topic, self-organization.
Exactly. Living things are like the masters of self-organization. They build and maintain order and complexity without some outside force calling the shots. It's like how complex software systems organize themselves through different processes and feedback loops. Think about how we grow from a single cell. There's no outside architect. It's all self-organization driven by that genetic software. And what's really amazing is how tough these self-organizing systems are. They can bounce back from problems and keep working, just like good distributed software.
That's wild to think about. And of course, living things are always changing, always reacting to their environment. So how does adaptation fit into this whole software thing?
Adaptation, well, is crucial for survival and is definitely a core part of our biological software. Living things can change what they do, even their basic software, to deal with changes in their environment. This happens over generations, through evolution, or even within a single lifetime through learning. And it's just like how we update software for new operating systems or whatever challenges come up. That ability to adapt, to change the code, to handle new info or demands, that's fundamental for both biological and good artificial systems.
Okay, so the software can change and adapt,
Yeah.
but it needs energy to run, right? Kind of like how my phone needs charging. So how does energy processing or metabolism fit into all of this?
You got it. Software needs a physical machine to run on, and it needs energy to do its calculations. For us living things, metabolism is what gives that vital energy to our cellular software. It's what keeps everything powered up, allowing replication, adaptation, all that jazz to actually happen. And it's the same in artificial life. Any artificial system needs energy to power its computations and actions. No energy, no software running. The flow of energy is what keeps both biological and artificial software going strong.
That's like super important. And living things aren't just floating in space. They have bodies that interact with the world. How does that embodiment and situatedness, as you called it, play into this software idea?
That's a really important point. It shows that the software of life isn't just running in some empty space. Think about how software connects to the real world, sensors and actuators. A self-driving car has cameras and steering, right? Well, living things have bodies with senses to perceive the environment and physical structures to act on it. That constant back and forth between the software and the physical world is key for the software to work right and do things like finding food or staying safe. The environment the software is in really shapes how it works and how it evolves.
So it's like the body is the interface for the software to work with the world, always taking in information and doing stuff with it. That makes a lot of sense. And speaking of interacting with the world, what about learning and intelligence? How does that look from a software point of view?
Well, learning from experience is a big deal for intelligent software. Living things, especially those with brains, they learn by changing their internal software. Think of the connections between neurons changing based on what they experience. It helps them get better at stuff over time, and this is a big goal in artificial life research, to make artificial agents that can learn and evolve their software to become smarter and more capable. What's really cool is that in biological learning, the parameters or even the structure of the software itself gets adjusted based on new data.
It's all starting to come together. It's really fascinating. Okay, last one. When we look at the whole history of life on Earth, we see this incredible ongoing process of evolution. How does open-ended evolution tie into our software analogy?
The fact that evolution can keep changing in unpredictable ways means that the software of life isn't finished. It's constantly being adjusted, modified, and even totally rewritten over huge amounts of time. That's how we get brand new forms of life and functions that we couldn't have even imagined from the original code. It's like how complex software ecosystems can evolve in weird and wonderful ways, with new features and even new applications popping up just from how the code interacts and changes. There's no set endpoint. The evolutionary software is always exploring and trying new things.
It's like a code base that never stops growing and changing. Now let's go back in time. How does this software view help us understand how life even began in the first place?
Now we're getting to the really big questions. This is where the metabolism first and replicator first theories come in, and our software lens can help us understand them. Think of metabolism first as focusing on how the first self-sustaining programs came about. Those early metabolic networks could process energy and stay organized. They were like the earliest versions of self-running software. The replicator first theory, on the other hand, focuses on the development of that core code, probably RNA, which could store and copy information. That was crucial for passing on the software and getting evolution going.
So metabolism first is like booting up the operating system, being able to use energy and keep things running. And replicator first is like the first killer app, the ability to store and copy information. Is that right?
That's a great way to put it. And the really interesting thing is that these two ideas, they don't have to be separate. More and more, scientists think that both self-sustaining software, the ability to handle energy and stay organized, and replicating code, being able to store and pass on information, were both essential and work together to spark life. It's like life needed both of those core software abilities right from the start.
So even in the very beginning, the two key parts of this biological software, the ability to run and the ability to copy itself, were both coming online. Okay, let's go even deeper now. Tell me about these advanced software concepts, active inference and dissipative adaptation.
Okay, these are some really cutting edge ideas that can give us an even deeper understanding of how sophisticated biological software really is. First up, active inference. Imagine a boundary called a Markov blanket, separating the internal stuff of a software agent, like an organism, from the outside world. Active inference says that this agent is always trying to minimize the difference between what it thinks the world is like, its internal model, and what it's actually sensing. It does this by updating its internal model using something called Bayesian inference, which is like constantly refining its best guess about the world based on new evidence. It's like the organism's internal software is constantly running simulations to figure out what's going to happen next, and then acting in ways that make those predictions come true.
So our internal software isn't just passively taking in information, it's actively trying to figure things out by predicting and then acting on those predictions. Like you're always testing our assumptions against reality.
Exactly. And dissipative adaptation builds on that idea. It says that living systems have this fundamental software strategy for staying organized and complex, even though the universe tends towards disorder, entropy. They do this by using and getting rid of energy from their environment. This constant flow of energy lets the software fight against entropy and keep its structure and function going strong. Think of it like the software actively working to keep itself running and organized by drawing on external resources and getting rid of waste. Just like a computer needs power and generates heat. This constant energy flow isn't a bug, it's essential for keeping that complex software of life going.
So these aren't just passive systems. They're actively working to maintain themselves and understand their world at a really fundamental level. And that brings us back to the idea of the new machine. How does that fit in with this we are all software perspective?
The new machine concept really completes the picture. These aren't just your typical machines with simple instructions. They're complex systems where software is essential for how they self-organize, adapt to change, and come up with new behaviors. It's like seeing lifelike software running on non-biological hardware. Think about robots that can learn, adapt to new environments, and even do things they weren't programmed to do. They embody this idea of complex software creating lifelike qualities on a different physical platform. The focus shifts from the specific materials to the information and how it's organized.
So the new machine isn't just about the physical parts. It's about how hardware and this sophisticated adaptable software work together to create complex, almost lifelike actions. It really emphasizes that the way information is processed might be the key to understanding life, no matter what it's made of.
Exactly. It shows that the principles of self-organization, adaptation, and emergence, all driven by that underlying software, aren't limited to biology. We're seeing them in increasingly advanced artificial systems, too.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the idea that we are all software. So to sum it all up, what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
The main idea is this. Thinking of life as self-organizing information processing this we are all software concept changes how we see things. It's not just about the physical parts of living things, it's about the crucial role played by the underlying software. The complex network of instructions and processes, that's what really controls how living systems work, how they evolve, and how they interact with the world. It's a powerful way to understand the amazing variety of life.
And why should our listeners care about this? How can they use this new perspective?
This perspective gives us a really strong framework for understanding both the natural world and the crazy fast development of artificial life. It helps us appreciate just how complex and ingenious all living things are. And it helps us see the common threads that might connect all forms of life, whether they're made of cells or silicon. It pushes us to think about life not just as a bunch of stuff, but as a dynamic and evolving process of information.
So it's a new way to see the world and where we fit in, one that highlights the importance of information and how it's organized. That's really thought-provoking. And to leave you all with something to ponder, if life is fundamentally information processing, if we are all basically complex software running on biological hardware, what does that tell us about consciousness, about who we are as individuals, and maybe even about the possibility of life existing beyond the biological forms we know? Think about what this software perspective means for your own understanding of the world and your place in it? It's a big question, and one that we've only just begun to explore in this deep dive.